So let's sit tall and close the eyes. Just take a nice breath in, a nice breath out. Allow yourself to arrive. Be present to whatever is. Be present to whatever it is that you're feeling in your physical body, whatever you're experiencing in the mind, whatever you are aware of from the center of the heart. And just hold a space for all that and then some. Recognize it's all part of the journey. And no matter what it is that is coming to you, no matter what it is that you are receiving or open to you, they are all simply opportunities to deepen your understanding of suffering, compassion, and healing, as well as resistance, as well as surrender. Placing the right hand on the heart, left hand over the right. Set an intention for your own healing. Set an intention to dive deep into awareness of self, and so that in your healing, you may manifest the reality of walking through this world as a more compassionate human, as a human who knows a little more about wholeness and fullness, and as a person who is less harmful and less violent. And we'll lift our voices in one beautiful Om. Take a nice breath in. Om. Bowing the head to the heart, acknowledging all. And draw the face to center, release the hands. Thank you all for joining me this morning. So good to see you all. So today's talk is going to be about enthusiasm, spiritual enthusiasm. As people who come to the 9 o'clock class know, both kind of build upon each other. So the 9 o'clock class has a theme, and that theme comes through here where we can talk about it and come to a deeper understanding of embodying these qualities, these principles of yoga, these qualities and principles of living a good, healthy life, qualities and principles that are found in every tradition, no matter which one you're talking about. Enthusiasm is looked at across the board as such an important quality to embody, such an important experience to open oneself up to, you know. For example, in Christianity, using a little bit of different language, but they talk about Christ's enthusiasm in carrying the cross. There was resistance, there was doubt, but then there was enthusiasm. There was an understanding that this had to be done, and that it had to be done for the good of all, and for the wellness of all, and for the general healing of all. And so Christ accepted the burden. Initially there was resistance. Like with us, there's resistance. Initially there was doubt. As with us, there's usually doubt at first. I'm not sure if I can do this. I don't know if I'm strong enough. I don't know if I'm clear enough. I don't know if I'm good enough. I don't know if I'm enough. I don't know why you can't do it instead of me. You know? But that usually clears up for us if we have a heart that's open to the potential of seeing the greater purpose behind everything that we encounter in this life. Everything that we encounter in this life, on some level, is an opportunity for us to open more fully to the power of bringing these positive, uplifting qualities to the world in general, so that we walk through the world as less harmful, less violent, less doubtful, less imposing, less manipulative, less of anything that contributes to the demise of faith and goodness, or the perceived demise. It can never really be done away with. But through the embracing of qualities within ourselves, positive, good, uplifting qualities, we become that in the world. Gandhi was so clear when he said, be the change you want to see in the world. Because if you're not it, you're never going to see it. You cannot visualize something in its full potential that you yourself are not actively embracing. This is why there's so much doubt spread throughout the world. This is the one issue with science. Now, I'm a scientist, so I can say this. I'm trained as a scientist. I know the mathematical. I know the equational. I know the steps of scientific research and inquiry. This is what my PhD was all about. It was cold, hard evidence. But the one thing that I could never accept was that if you can't prove it, then it mustn't exist. No. We're babies. We're these little tiny babies. We're not even learning how to walk yet. There's a world, there's a universe out there of things we cannot prove. We can't prove the universe, but it's there. We can't prove our life. We don't even know why we're alive. Like, what crazy chaos caused this physicality? Yet it's here. So that's just a power play of the ego. It's people wanting to feel like they have the answers when they say, if you can't prove it, then it doesn't exist. I love the scientists who, started the conversation of quantum physics and quantum reality, because they were the ones who understood science is a baby in comparison to whatever that is. Science is just starting to scratch at the surface. It hasn't even begun to dig its den. No. It's still kind of looking for a place to settle. It's amazing. Wheeler, who was one of the originators of the quantum theory, he was known for saying so many things of such a spiritual level. And basically, what he was talking about is that the way you see it is what formulates the way it appears. The way you see it, the questions you ask, are what formulate the answer you receive. Are you asking the right questions? Are you asking the right questions? Don't ask, am I too limited for this? No, that's not the right question, because then you will think you are. Instead, ask yourself, how can I have the fullest possible experience with this? Then you're not focusing on perceived limitation. You're focusing on the experience. And when you focus on the experience and not the limitation, then you can move into enthusiasm about the experience. Almost no matter what. Almost. It's hard, when we're facing things that are just of such a dire nature. But there's still room for enthusiasm there. And while that sounds a little crazy maybe, where can there be enthusiasm in critical situations that are devastating? With love, with compassion, with understanding. That's where the enthusiasm can be. That you love enthusiastically, even though they're suffering. That you see the potential enthusiastically, even though you may be the only one in the room who is. That you recognize that this too is an opportunity to open up to the greater wholeness of the heart, of your own heart, and them of theirs, and all of us together of the one heart. The one heart. We won't enter into knowing the one heart, the one, without enthusiasm. Because enthusiasm is the propeller. It's the essence of pushing you a little bit over the edge of logical sanity and into the realm of the unknown. And the realm of the unknown is, for many of us, a fearful place. It's like, I don't know what's over there. It's woo-woo mysticism. No. But every tradition addresses mysticism, whether they acknowledge it or not. Every tradition has a mystical tradition within it. Islam has a mystical tradition, Christianity has a mystical tradition, Judaism has a mystical tradition, Hinduism has a mystical tradition. Every tradition has the mystical, much of which is hidden from your average everyday person, predominantly for fear that they won't understand and will hightail it in the opposite direction out of fear. And then, or it will be misused for the purposes of the ego, which it ends up being misused anyway a lot of the time by the people who do hold this knowledge, because they get caught up in the worldly excitement versus the spiritual enthusiasm. And we see this because there's corruption in every tradition. It's not just in Christianity, it's not just in Islam, it's not just in Hinduism, it's in every tradition. There's corruption. Does that mean we should throw the baby out with the bathwater? No, not at all. What we can do, if we choose to, is we can look at the teachings, the core teachings that run through. We can look at those teachings enthusiastically, and we can recognize the flaws of humanity, and we can say, this needs to change. This needs to change. How do we best bring about change? And then we can come together as a community and we can maneuver change so that we all come into a greater alignment with the higher self, with the one heart, with the one. We can all come into greater alignment. Without enthusiasm, why would you even want to? Without enthusiasm, there's just doubt. Throw the baby out with the bathwater because these people, they're crooked, man. You know? They ruined the whole thing for everybody. No, they didn't ruin anything. They are ruining themselves. And whoever they're harming, they're contributing to their psychology of doubt. They're stealing their enthusiasm. Don't let them steal your enthusiasm. See the greater world. See the greater picture. See the unity. See the love. Don't meet them where they're at, because there's no enthusiasm there. Do not meet them where they're at. Meet them where you're at. And if goodness is what is emanating from your heart, then let it be infectious. Because, we can talk about a lot of different, issues that are going on in the world today. In yoga, in Hinduism, they talk about reincarnation and the idea, the theory, or the wisdom that the soul is eternal. There's no tradition that counters this, by the way. There's no tradition that counters the idea that the soul is eternal. The soul is eternal in every tradition. It's the idea of coming back to this earth that is complicated. That's the idea that's complicated. But in Hinduism, they say, you come back to this earth in a similar condition to which you left it. Right? You come back to this earth in your next life in a similar condition to what you left this earth. And this is why within Hinduism and yoga and all those related practices, there's a really strong focus on dying a good death. Death is not a taboo subject in India in any way, shape, or form. There's auspicious times to die. There's auspicious ways to die. You live your whole life basically for two reasons. The first reason is to come into a deep connection and surrender to the one heart, to the one. And the second is to die a good death, so that when you come back next time, you come back in a condition similar to or better than what you were in this one with regard to your spiritual work. So that you don't lose whatever you've learned in this life and take a few steps back. That instead, you're a few steps forward on your path. And maybe you're born, as they say, into a family of yogis. So that becomes the essence of the foundation of your next life. So, understanding that that's a perception, that's an idea, it's a theory, it's a wisdom within the yoga tradition. Now we can say, so what about the people who commit controversy in this life? Well, if a person harms another person in a significant way, in any way, there should be a resolution for that of some sort or another. right now there's a mass exodus moving away from the Catholic Church because there's so much pedophilia that's happening there. There's so many children who are being harmed. And there's groups of people who are really meeting these priests where the priests are at. They're meeting them with hate, with anger, with dissent. They're meeting them with the same kind of energy that the priests committed these acts of violence with, right? We see this in the Me Too movement also. So the Me Too movement, a very, very important and powerful movement, unless any portion of that movement is committing itself through anger and meeting the ones who were the perpetrators at the same level that they're at. So they're meeting them with hate. They're meeting them with distrust. They're meeting them with animosity. They're calling for them to be strung up, basically. So they're meeting them where they're at. It's not effective. It's human, but it's not effective. We can call for justice without calling for a lynching. We can call for corrective action without calling for the damnation of the person completely and 100%. We can call for resolution in a way that allows resolution to occur without becoming part of the problem. I have a lot of respect for the Me Too movement because, I've been on the receiving end of that too in my life more than once. And it really would have been nice if there was a community to support, but at that time everything was like, nobody wanted to talk about it, nobody wanted to hear about it. But if I go through the rest of my life just condemning, then where am I left in my life? I need to find resolution in my life for what I have experienced and work toward resolution as best I can with regard to the person who kind of set this in motion. So if we take this to another place and we say, so if we're not going to meet these harmful, violent people where they're at, what excuse do we use for meeting them with compassion? Wow, that's a heavy question, isn't it? Well, are you concerned for your children's world? Are you concerned for your children's world? Are you concerned for 5 generations from now? Of course you are. We're all concerned for future generations. So if we had it within our capacity to call for justice, to call for resolution, but to also still love and feel compassion so that a person has been empowered to resolve their crimes in this life so that they might be born again into a better condition in the next life, perhaps a condition where they won't be so violent. Isn't that worth it? Isn't that worth a little bit of compassion and relinquishing a little bit of anger? Not anger, healthy anger, but violent anger. Don't string people up. That person has more potential than any of us are willing to acknowledge. It may not be this go around, but hey, every tradition that ever has been tells us that the soul is eternal. And many traditions suggest that the soul comes back. Do we want the soul to come back in that condition? No. You don't have to go throw your arms around and be like, oh, I understand totally, you're off the hook. No, they're not off the hook. They have to resolve their violence. They need to resolve their violence. But their violence will never be resolved as long as we're being violent to them and contributing to it. We are not passive, and we are not doormats to have feet wiped upon. We are activists in this life, whether we know it or not. we are spiritual activists, and we are activists in whatever other capacity we choose to see ourselves. But there is a way. There is a way to be activated through compassion and for the true betterment of all, versus looking at who is worthy and who is not worthy. Thich Nhat Hanh has this most beautiful poem called Call Me By My True Names. Some of you have heard me talk about this before. Who has not heard that poem, Call Me By My True Names? Everybody's familiar with that? Yeah. Is that not what he's saying? That's exactly what he's saying. He's saying, you could have been either one. You could have been the 12-year-old girl who jumped over and took her own life. You could have been the boy pirate who was about to rape and kill her. Depending upon what your circumstances were, you could have been either one. So don't judge them so harshly as to hate them. Instead, contribute to building a world enthusiastically where maybe that never has to happen. Maybe that never has to happen. Maybe that's seeing through rose-colored glasses. Because in our lifetime, in our short span on this planet, it's not likely that we will obliterate violence. But there are 8 billion people in the world now, just about. So, what is 1% of 8 billion? 800,000? Right? Oh, somewhere around there. I think it's 800,000. So, 1% of 8 billion people, even if it's 80,000, if your acts of kindness and compassion clear a path for even 0.1% of this world's population, both human and non-human, to experience less suffering at your hands, through your actions, through your words, and through your intentions. Doesn't that sound meaningful? If you adopting a perspective and a lifestyle, and me doing the same, based in compassion, and if that alleviates the suffering of even just a couple of people, doesn't that contribute to a world that could eventually, potentially be so much less violent, and one where more people experience freedom? Not freedom to commit violent acts. No, there's got to be some resolution there. There's got to be something that happens, but whatever it is we're doing isn't working because violence is going up, peace is going down. So what we're doing, the way we're addressing it, is not working. It's not. There are still people out there hurting children, hurting adults. Human trafficking is at an all-time high. You know, they say, well, it's only looking like it's at an all-time high because there's so much focus on it. Well, it doesn't matter if one person is being trafficked or 1 million people are being trafficked. People are still being trafficked. Trafficked. Is that the right word? That's a hard one to say in the past tense. It doesn't matter if one person is still being treated in that way. It means that what we're doing isn't enough. So we have to say, where else can we bring an enthusiastic expression of goodness, an enthusiastic expression of compassion, an enthusiastic expression of unity? You know, it's probably a really super controversial thing to say, but for the priest who assaults the child, and for the producer who assaults the actress or the actor, and for the parent who assaults the child, and the spouse who assaults the spouse, and the person who assaults the person, we're all at fault. Because we have communally created a society where that's possible. So we're all, every one of us, are on some level responsible. That's like really not a popular thing to say. And a lot of people would be like, what are you talking about? That's not true. No way. I never hurt anybody. No, but how many people have you walked past? You never hurt anybody. But how many people have we walked past? How many homeless people have we spit at? How many people have we judged? How many times have we said, oh, don't you just feel like punching him? How many times have we expressed our own rage, inviting other people to express theirs? It's part of the crazy dynamic of our society, And we see this so much in the West right now, the United States. Peace is going down. Violence is going up. When did we ever think that we would live in a time where the leader of our country could say heinous things about killing reporters? I mean, those words are not acceptable from anyone. But then we have to look at our own life, don't we? We have to look at our own life and we have to ask, how many times have I looked at another person and said, they should get what's coming to them, based on my own ego? Same thing. It's just that he's got the nerve to say it out loud. And we're walking around stuffing it in our pockets and not addressing it. Instead, we're calling him out on his crap. But his crap is the same crap as our crap. It's just a different level. I'm not saying go run up and hug the man. No. There has to be resolution for everything. But if that resolution is committed with violence in mind, then the resolution is violent. If the resolution is committed with goodness in mind, then the resolution is useful. If the resolution is committed with goodness in mind, then the resolution opens us all up to enthusiasm. If the resolution is committed with violence in mind and hate in mind, then it shuts enthusiasm right down. And where do we go next? We don't know. And we're afraid to find out. Does that make sense? Yeah? Any questions or thoughts right now? Any ideas? It's never about the soul of the person. It's only about their actions. It doesn't matter if it's your neighbor, if it's some politician, or yourself. It's the quality of the actions that you bring forward. And if we bring forward actions that are constantly full with fear and doubt, then our actions are going to be harmful. Absolutely. So interesting, I've had a number of students over the years, when they hear some of these talks on responsibility, initially they get all fired up, like happy fired up. They're like, oh, I love it. Responsibility, yes. I'm going to go home. I'm going to put all this in play. I'm going to call myself on my stuff, compassionately, of course, and going to make big change in my life. Inevitably, just a couple of days later, I'll get a message, or they'll come by and they'll say, this isn't easy. This is hard. I don't even know if I want to do it. It's like, I feel like I have to watch myself all the time because I just do so many harmful things. Things I never realized were harmful before. Like, well, you open the floodgates. You get to address the flood, right? But that's a great thing. Because what's waiting for you after the waters dry up from the flood? Very fertile soil. Very, very fertile soil. A soil where you can grow what you want to grow, not what you're compelled to grow because of an unhealthy ego. A soil where you can plant seeds the way you feel is the correct way of planting. It's amazing. But we have to go through this. It's just such a tumultuous time. In the yoga tradition, in many of the scriptures, they say we live in ignorance. They call it Maya. In some traditions, Maya means illusion. And then they say avidya, not wise, ignorant. So we live in illusion. We live ignorantly until a moment And usually there's several moments in any given life, but in a moment, there's like a window of opportunity. It just opens a little, tiniest little bit. And you have like your heart is drawn out of you and into a realization of pain, or a realization of suffering, or a realization of the importance of our being or the purpose of our life. And that compels us, if we're brave, to go further into that inquiry. And if we're really super fearful, the grantees we were talking about this morning in class, we shut it down and we say, nope, not going there doing that. Very comfortable where I am right now, thank you. I'll just continue on with these habits, no problem. But for a handful of people, that little opening in the window of opportunity sends them right through it. And they start walking a path where they're looking at everything that they're doing. And they're accepting full self-responsibility, full responsibility of self. And what that means is that they're looking at themselves and they are accepting that they do have, hidden within themselves, underneath of the unhealthy ego, the ability to respond to situations in life rather than react. And in that response, we're more aware of the harm that we are purposefully inflicting versus the compassion that we are purposefully sharing. Like I said, I'm not saying let anybody off the hook. No. There's karma, not a payback system, but definitely something that has to be resolved. And each person acquires karma. And we need to be active in this world. We need to be, the Greta Thunbergs of this world. We need to get up. We need to have our voices heard. We need to live what it is that we're preaching. We need to live that. I read an article about Greta, and it said that, what did she do? She took a boat over to the U.S. instead of a plane because the signature, the carbon signature from the plane was so much more than the boat, even though the plane could have had her here in a couple of hours. But she took the boat because she wouldn't be untrue to her conviction. It's pretty powerful. Yeah. How old is she now? She's like 15? Yeah. Man, I probably wouldn't walk to the store, to be honest with you. And I'm very much an environmentalist, but there's some hills involved here, So I don't know. The car seems pretty easy. Now maybe I'll have to think about that. But yeah. In which convictions that you have in your life, are you not fully investing in? Fully investing in. Where if you invest just a little bit more of your time and energy, you might find that there's a beautiful flourishing that occurs because of it. A flourishing of enthusiasm, a flourishing of understanding, a flourishing of recognition that the whole purpose of this life is not to get what we want, but to heal the spaces within ourselves and each other where we feel we've been harmed or harmed ourselves. The purpose of this life is healing. It's not getting what we want. Any thoughts or questions or reflections so far?
When you were talking about the Catholic Church, in the spring and during Lent, I went to a series in my parish. It was all about the abuse crisis. So it was probably the most open the church was to admitting to any kind of culpability. But what was interesting in the group discussions where people were angry at the priests who were the abusers, they were angrier at the people who let it continue to happen.
That's right.
They were really furious about that.
Mm-hmm.
And that was where the anger was.
Yeah.
I don't think they still were as open about things. There's a great podcast that the Jesuits do about this that talks about the role of clericalism and homosexuality and all of it. Not being that the abusers are gay, but there's this weird kind of dynamic where there's a very strong homosexual subculture among Catholic priests, especially in the hierarchy. And it's kind of like, we'll keep your secret and you keep our secret. And we won't tell on you and you don't tell on us, because they knew about the This particular thing didn't get that deep into it, but it was at least the most honest look I've seen to say, like, we really have a problem, we need to fix it.
Yeah.
But it's sad that it got to this point.
Absolutely. Here's the little shocker. At least, I don't know, in my mind, it's always been at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Always. It's no worse now than it ever was.
Mm-hmm.
It's always been this way.
Well, it's the feeling of, are they sorry, or are they sorry?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I would suggest to you that much of it is the latter. Much of it is the latter, because it's such a cultural practice within their particular community, and it's like the pirate child, right? He's raised within a community of pirates, and if he doesn't behave like one of them, then he's going to be assailed and maybe even killed. So, if you're enculturated into a culture, then that's the culture that you belong to. Same thing like, in the 80s, there was the punk rock, or the 70s, the punk rock culture, right? Yeah, of which I was part of. And I really enjoyed that. But you didn't go into, the L'Amour's East up in, Queens, I guess it was, in a three-piece suit, You dressed the part. Spiked up the hair and wore the leather and the spiked cuffs and oh yeah, totally. Yeah. There may be one around somewhere if I look deep enough. It's the culture that you belong to. And then eventually that becomes a norm. And even though people outside of your culture say no, you're within a culture that's saying yes. And so you make your choices. And the harm that comes from those choices is what sits on your soul. And that's what needs to be resolved. But yes, I can completely understand. People are much more angry at the bystanders, the ones who allowed it. That's the same thing with the Olympics, with the girls who were all abused by that one doctor. How many girls was that? That was like 300 or something, right? It's like over 300 girls that doctor abused. And so many of their coaches knew it was happening. I mean, come on, this is one man. Never mind a whole culture. I think that what we're seeing now, a little bit at least, we're starting to see a bit of a turnaround. There's a divide that's actually happening, and I think it's been happening for a while. But there's a community of Catholics who are very unhappy within the Catholic Church, and they've become progressive. Or there's something now called the North American Catholicism? I think it is. I think it's North American Catholicism, or the North American Catholic Church. And they're supposedly separated themselves, or in the process of doing so. So to address these human issues, avoid them in the future by building a different paradigm based on the same scriptures and based on the teachings. Because, to come back to what we were saying earlier, to throw the baby out with the bathwater would be really unfortunate, because the teachings of Christ, the teachings of the Bible, the teachings of the Quran, the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, the teachings of whatever tradition we're talking about, those teachings are beyond the person. The person who is committing the violence is not committing the violence because of those teachings. They're committing the violence because their ego is completely unhealthy. And they're existing in a state of violence, and that's the world that they see themselves in, and so that's what they're empowering within themselves, is violence. Now, for us as spiritual practitioners, we can look at the path we're on and ask ourselves, where am I empowering violence in myself, in my reactions to people? And the more that we recognize where we are empowering that within ourselves, the more we honestly recognize that and address it, the more we will know exactly how to deal with these other situations. Because things become clear. Things become very clear. It's got to end. How does it end? Well, these broken structures need to be torn down. And then something new take its place. You've got to be mindful, though, because the something new can be just as bad as the something old, or better. Depends on what our intentions are. Depends on what our intentions are.
Did you see the news clip about the brother of the gentleman that was murdered in his apartment?
When he hugged?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what did he say? Do you remember?
Jack forgive you?
Yeah. And I think in an interview later, he talked about that a little bit. And he said something to the effect of, it doesn't serve anybody for me to hold into an anger, because that's just something that's going to kill me. I'm already feeling grief for my loss. If I put hate into the grief, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, but if I put hate into the grief, then that's a whole different ballgame. Yeah.
Changing paradigm.
We saw that in Sandy Hook too, right? We saw that in Sandy Hook when the shooter opened up, at the school, and all these people were coming forward, and they were blaming the mom, and they were blaming the boy who had mental health issues, and and the parents came forward and started putting up these billboards and said, "We're choosing love. We're choosing love. Choose love." It doesn't mean that there's not repercussions or that there's not justice that needs to be had. Of course, there will be justice. There has to be. But maybe our gossip isn't going to contribute to it. Yeah. Our discussion of the issues and the concerns could contribute to it. But our gossip of, well, she was just a crappy mother, and you see how she was. I mean, they were like low income family. They were on welfare. They were this. They were that. That's gossip. That's violent gossip. Because the reality is that most mass shooters in this country are white males. Well, that's a trend. And not all of them are from lower socioeconomic homes. As a matter of fact, most of them are middle class or upward. That's another trend. So if this is where most of the mass shooters in this country are, they are white, Christian, middle to middle upper class. What's going on there that's not being addressed? And we're busy talking about this mom because she was on welfare. What a crappy mom she must have been because her kid did this. Well, I thought I was a pretty good mom, But that didn't stop my son from calling his bus driver a really, really bad name when he was 13 years old. One that he got grounded for the rest of his life. Yeah, it's amazing. Amazing. But such a powerful example, right? Yeah.
We keep having this perception that the violence is coming from immigrants. And I hear it. I was one of the last shootings. He said, "Man, you weren't even an immigrant."
That's right.
Been immigrants.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was all these mosque shootings and temple shootings that we've seen happening have been mostly white attacking color or difference, and not the color or difference attacking white. Maya, illusion. But the more that we can see clearly, the less illusion there is in the world. We don't have to go preach it out to people, and as a matter of fact, we shouldn't, because, conversion is not useful. Conversion is not something that stays with a person. If a person doesn't have a conviction in their own heart, they're not going to stick with it. When I was doing my first degree in school, it was one of my classes was constitutional law, and we had to review a series of cases on different constitutional questions, and I chose religious freedom, and I chose the case on Santeria. I was a vegan at the time, and I'm a vegetarian. I don't eat any animals, none of those things. But at that time, I was a vegan, and I was a pretty hardcore vegan. I had my opinions, and I chose to do this case study on Santeria. And for those of you who don't know, Santeria is a practice that originated in the islands and in Africa, and it involves animal sacrifice. So there was this lawsuit that was brought against this community in South Florida, where they were trying to say that the animal sacrifice that the Santerian priests and priestesses were using was animal abuse, and that they should be stopped from doing this, and it should be forbidden. Now, Santeria came over to the United States with slavery, and when the slaves came here, they were forcefully converted to some form of Christianity, whatever that may have been for them in their area. And the captors felt that they had obliterated the Santeria. But what actually ended up happening was that the conversion didn't hold. It actually blended. The people, the Santeria, went underground, and they started to incorporate aspects of whatever Christianity they were being taught into their Santeria practices. And in the 1970s, it started resurfacing in Florida because communities were growing at that point in time, and communities were coming together and taking part in their particular rituals and whatnot. And Santeria started coming back in pretty full force. And then this lawsuit came forward that, this should be stopped. The Supreme Court decided that they couldn't stop it. It's not up to them. There's a division between, religion and state, and that this is a bona fide religion. And they did some interesting studies, too. They compared the Santerian priests and priestesses' practices of animal sacrifice with the slaughterhouses where people go, get their meat from to have their dinner. And they said the practices, the slaughterhouses should be shut down. If we're going to address animal abuse, then the first place we have to go is the slaughterhouse, because the slaughterhouses are by far so much more abusive. I mean, the end of any life is abusive. But their point was that you cannot address one without addressing the other. So unless you're willing to close down your neighborhood butcher shop, then the argument on that level doesn't hold water. It also doesn't hold water because it's separation of church and state. And they don't have the right to tell people they can't practice their religion. But the whole point with sharing this with you was to say that conversion doesn't work because the conviction is not in the heart. So while you may have a small percentage, maybe 4 to 5% of converts actually that are forced conversion, actually stay true to the conversion, the other 90+% aren't going to, because their heart has been cultivated elsewhere. And so on some level, they will find their way back to that, even if it means blending of traditions. So bringing that back to the conversation, we need to find our way through the practice of enthusiasm to seeing the power that compassion has to offer us as we walk through the world. That if we adopt a deeper experience of compassion and a deeper expression of compassion, then maybe we will come up with some solid solutions, or at least solutions that have more efficacy than the ones that we're currently engaging in. Because we'll be meeting issues, problems, concerns, and violence on a level other than where they already exist. But enthusiasm is important for that. To look and to have faith and to have our own personal conviction and to not be swayed from that conviction because someone thinks we're crazy because we see through rose-colored glasses. Somebody said that to me one time. I never forget something. They said, "You're just seeing the world through rose-colored glasses." I said, "No. They're not rose. I see there's suffering out there. I know that very well. I've experienced it. I know it really well. But I also know there's goodness. And I'm opting for goodness. That's what I'm looking at. I'm looking and I'm acknowledging the suffering and I'm serving whatever healing can happen from whatever actions I take part in. And I'm opting for goodness. I'm not going to contribute to the suffering just because it's there already. Then I'm just going to be contributing to more violence in the world. That's not seeing through rose-colored glasses. That's accepting self-responsibility. Seeing through rose-colored glasses is saying there's no suffering there. That would be a lie. Because in this world today, there's more suffering, and more. Now the question that we can ask ourselves, what responsibility am I willing to accept in order to bring a little light into that darkness? Yeah? So any other questions or thoughts? Yeah?
The one thing that I sort of been drawn to this, I've never really gotten involved in it. I don't really know the state. I can imagine maybe you know. But do we have any compassion in our prison systems?
Well, our prison system has issues. Huge issues. First of all, a lot of the people who are there don't belong there. This is a little crazy, right? I know people personally who have gone to jail for possession of marijuana, which, mind you, now in many states is no longer illegal. But they lost everything. They lost their job, their home, all their savings, their reputation. They lost everything. They learned how to be a criminal. And so they're either suffering greatly with no resolution from the state, or they're still in jail because they're in one of the states where they haven't changed the law yet. But our justice system is in many ways inherently broken. So we need a new system. We need a new system that looks at rehabilitation, not at punishment. Yes, punishment, it doesn't really have a place. Do you want to punish the person or do you want them to be a better person? You know, you're looking at somebody who commits a small crime. They can't feed their kids, so they go steal some milk from the local store. Or maybe they even hold the store up at gunpoint because they're so desperate, because they can't pay their rent, or because they just perceive that they lack. Do you want to punish that person and say, you step in line, you get in that line, you convert to our way of seeing things. Lie if you have to. But we're going to punish you to make sure that you stay in conversion. Or do you want to address the issue of why it happened in the first place? Like, why would people commit these smaller crimes? I'm not talking about the big capital crimes. I'm talking about your basic social crimes. Because we don't cultivate whole people. We don't start before the child is even born and talk about how can we make sure that every child who is born has a full life, has health care, has food, has a community, how has education, has all these things. What can we do to ensure the cultivation of a whole person, as whole as they can be? We're not doing that. And so our jails are getting filled with people who aren't conforming to an ideal that we're not even supporting. We're not even supporting it. This is the biggest issue. This is the biggest issue that I have with some pro-life groups, is that they're not pro-life, they're pro-birth, because once the baby is born, they don't care.
I'm just smiling because as you're saying it, I'm having the exact same thoughts about I don't even call them pro-lifers, I call them like pro-birthers, because that's it. They are fixated on that fetus, but they that fixation costs them nothing outside of that because they don't.
Yeah.
They want that baby to be born, but that's it. They don't want any other.
And we need to accept the responsibility of what the baby needs, of what the child needs, of what the family needs. There's tribes in Africa where they had this communal experience where everybody supported everybody. You know, one family wasn't doing well, and everybody brought them food. One family wasn't doing well, everybody brought them what they needed. Somebody did something that was harmful to someone in the community, they put them in the center of a circle. And they didn't punish them. What they ended up doing was holding them into a circle and then yelling at them, saying, "You've forgotten your goodness. You forgot. Do you remember when you supported so-and-so? Do you remember when you went out of your way to help this one? Do you remember when you pulled so-and-so out of the lake and saved their life? Do you remember how good you are? You've forgotten your goodness." This is amazing. So this was one of the last tribes in Africa that anthropologists invaded with their assumptions. I can say that I'm an anthropologist. And so they kind of stood on the outside of this before they introduced themselves into this culture. They didn't have any Western connection before. So this was an isolated community of people. But many tribes in Africa and other areas of the world had a similar practice. Then one day the anthropologists decided that they were going to introduce themselves. And they did. This was in the 1960s, like 1967, I think it was. And within a short period of time of like 2 years to 3 years, they started to see that because of this, what they're thinking was because of this introduction and the questions of the anthropologists as they learned how to speak their language, what they saw was that this village changed. And where their huts used to be in a circle with all the doors facing in and nothing over the door, so you could see right into your neighbor's hut, there was nothing to hide. Suddenly the huts were turning around and the doors were facing away from each other. They were less and less and less utilizing this communal circle for resolution of poor behavior and started gossiping, which was something they never did prior to this meeting of the West. Started losing communal hunting practices and started putting fences up between their huts. Stopped being so generous with one another, and if a family was suffering in a difficult time with no food, fewer people were willing to contribute to them. It's amazing when we see the changes that happen just because of an introduction. Just because of an introduction. It's pretty powerful. So we can ask ourselves when we're introducing ourselves to other people, what is it that we're introducing? You know? When we have people that we're putting into jails, what is it that we're really telling them? Sometimes jail is necessary, absolutely. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's really just a matter of us calling ourselves on our own flaws and trying to come up with a better system. One that addresses the person feeling like they're a whole person. Yeah. So I think I've run over. Oh, just a little bit. Just a little bit. So if no other questions, we'll sit tall. Close the eyes. Take a nice breath in, a nice breath out. And just simply commit. Commit yourself to walking the path of your spirituality. Commit yourself to walking the path of recognizing the existence and potential of goodness. And don't just meet people where they're at, meet them a step up from there. Empower all parties involved to lift up into yet another level of goodness with enthusiasm and with grace. Together we'll lift our voices in one Om. Take a nice breath in. Om. And bowing the head to the heart. acknowledging all beings, and draw the face to center. Namaste. Thank you so much for being here today. So good to see you all. I apologize keeping you a couple minutes over.